by this next year they have had settled themselves in London. Okay, I feel there are multiple errors here, but anyway, let's see who's going to identify which part has the error, part 1, part 2, part 3 or part 4. So everybody is giving me different parts. Let's break it down. Okay, so basically your clue phrase is the time phrase next year. The next year, why would you have had, doesn't make sense, right? And this phrase also is incorrect. By this time next year makes sense logically. By this time next year, they would have settled themselves in London. That makes sense, right? So which means the error is in part 1 and part B. Or you say by next year they would have settled themselves in London. Either ways would be right. So error is in part 1 and part 2. Are you following? Ma'am, my query is in this. What will be the error here? They gave the answer that this question is in past tense, but actually which is not, or it is in past tense. So please rectify. What will be the error in this sentence? Okay, let's look at the sentence. So, I snatch my boarding pass from a sullen airline attendant and my own grooming is restricted to a hastily tied ponytail and a sweatshirt. Right? So, where do you think the error is, or do you think there is an error at all? I snatch my boarding pass from a sullen airline attendant and my own grooming is restricted to a hastily tied ponytail and a sweatshirt. I am looking at it from a context of this person going through the motions of some journey or some trip, right? Boarding pass and all of that being the clue words, airline attendant. So, imagine this person is narrating it to another person, right? So, I snatch my boarding pass from a sullen airline attendant. So, it's very visual. I snatch my boarding pass from a sullen airline attendant and then what I do, my own grooming is restricted to a hastily tied ponytail. Here, the obvious error is hastily tied, right? Hastily, the adverb has to modify the verb tied, which was not in the right form. So, the very obvious error for me is part 4. Let's number the parts 1, 2, 3, 4, right? So, for me the obvious error is in part 4. I don't necessarily will change snatch in part 1 because it can still be grammatically correct and meaningfully correct. So, from a narrative point of view, right, I am telling another person saying, what I do is I do this, I snatch my boarding pass from a sullen airline attendant and my own grooming is restricted to a hastily tied ponytail and a sweatshirt. So, this second part of it seems to be more aligned towards the past tense. But technically, if you want to go by saying, hey, the general tense is past tense, so I want to change snatched also, it will still not make a difference. Okay, like I am saying, if I have to choose the most obvious error saying, I need only one part as an error, that will be for me 4 and not 1 necessarily. He considers me as his sister. He considers me his sister. Verbs like consider, think, call, etc. are not followed by as. That is correct. Ma'am, my doubt is, can this sentence be written as he consider me as his sister? No, it cannot be written, right? Because here, singular subject. He, she considers, subject verb agreement. They consider, and if you're using again as, then it's the same, right? There is no difference between what you have mentioned and what is there in the question. Okay, I don't know if this is a typo error or was this your question? Yes, that is correct. It is important not to direct people too much and to let them find their own way. So, where do you think the error is? So, basically here, if you look at it, they are referring to again more than one person, right? Noun number error, right? So, again same thing, there more than one person, so their ways. Noun number error, very easy to overlook this sort of an error, especially noun number errors. You need to pay attention to the subject and the pronoun. Always, finding errors is more to do with attention to detail. Have you practiced to such an extent where you are in the habit of being able to identify these sort of errors quickly? Where else is the error? Which other part do you think has an error? In terms of just parallel construction, to direct, to let is fine. There is no let to, it is to let because of this conjunction at and, right? I always say as a conjunction and always connects two clauses, which means complete thought. It is important not to direct people too much. This is only because so many of you came back and had a disconnect. That is one clause, right? Clause 1. Clause 2. So like how it is important not to direct people too much, it is also important not to let them, or to let them, in this context it will be to let them find their own ways. It is important not to direct people too much, and it is important to let them find their own ways, right? So in that context, these two are supporting each other in terms of parallel construction. When I remove them separately and look at each clause, are you following? That is why here to let is absolutely fine. Are you following? The obvious error is in part 4, where we are referring to, your pronoun there is there, you're talking about more than one person, people. The obvious error is in part 4. In the construction, given the conjunction, and if I look at both the clauses separately, it will make sense for me to have to let. It is important not to direct them too much. At the same time, it is important to let them find their own ways. Are you clear now? Super. You wash the dishes and I dry them. Okay, where do you think the error is, or is there any error at all? While you guys try and answer this question, logically, if you look at it, it makes sense to say, hey, you wash the dishes and after you do that, I'm going to do something else, right? So you're talking about, you're referring to something that will happen in the future post your action in the present. Now, a lot of us might come back and say, hey, the collocation, I think one of you had pointed out, saying, normally the collocation is you do the dishes, right? But in most cases, these are kind of interchangeable, right? You can wash the dishes, you can do the dishes, you can clean the dishes, and in fact, do the dishes is very informal. That's the collocation that we're familiar with. But wash the dishes also is acceptable because it conveys the same meaning. So that way, so you wash the dishes is fine, right? But after you do that, I'm going to do something else and I will dry them, right? So for me, I would lean more towards D. But in terms of collocation, see, when you look at collocations technically, right, wash, simple present tense. But even then, logically, if you have to look at the context, I will dry them sounds correct instead of saying I dry them, right? So if I have to strictly go by and as a conjunction and parallel construction also, it still doesn't make sense. I will lean more towards changing D to I will dry them rather than say I dry them in this given context. It sounds weird. So I would lean more towards option D being an error, yeah. But we can kind of maybe do a little more research on this and try and figure out, because this for me seems like an exception. At any arrival in Delhi, I went straight to the nearest hospital. This is an easy one. As soon as you as soon as you read the context, obviously error is in part 1. So how can you modify this part A to? What can you change? In Delhi, place, preposition in is correct. I went straight to the nearest hospital is also grammatically correct. Not at the arrival. What's the right preposition you'll use? Anybody? Yes, on arriving, right? So you either say on the arrival or on my arrival in Delhi, right? That makes sense. After arriving is also fine. So either ways, at any as a quantifier doesn't make sense at all. Or upon arriving in Delhi, anything is fine, but this any is incorrect here. Okay. Shree's question, next question. Cheating in the ongoing state board matriculation exams in the UP has literally scaled new heights. Okay. So cheating here is acting like a noun, it's a gerund. What in the ongoing state board? Cheating in the ongoing state board matriculation exam in the UP has literally scaled new heights. Okay, if you ask me, out of these 4 parts, where do you think the error is? I would say that the error is actually, you don't need this definite article here, right? Correct. So most of you got that right? It's like, it's a state and, there is no need for the definite article there. So cheating in the ongoing state board matriculation exams in UP, not in the UP. So you just delete the definite article, which is unnecessary before the state. Has literally scaled new heights. Everything else is fine. Yeah, so that's part 2. So easy one. Shree, hope you got that.